We're good? Okay, welcome to the Planning and Works Committee meeting. Sorry for the delay. We've had some pretty meaty items today to deal with. And we're a little bit behind schedule, but we appreciate everybody's cooperation. Any declaration of pecuniary interest to declare? Seeing none. We have a number of delegations on 2 items. So we will start with the Westmount Road intersection improvement project. This is on the consent agenda and is just to inform council that a PIC is to be held with a preliminary design for this particular project. But we have 2 delegations who wish to speak to that. So I'll ask the first of those, David Trueman, to come forward. Welcome, welcome, David.
Thank you.
After the delegations, Mr. Schmidt's going to provide some further context to the project.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Council, for allowing me to speak. My name is David Trueman. The views I expressed today are my own, not necessarily of any of the organizations of which I'm a member, but for context, I'll mention those. I do chair the Transportation Sector Committee of Climate Action WR. I am on the steering committee of CycleWR. I'm a board member of Waterloo Cycling Club. And most recently, I'm spearheading a project called Mapping WR, which aims to make finding low-carbon ways to get around Waterloo region easy and convenient. I am a resident of Uptown West, and this presentation was prepared jointly with my colleague Dan Brotherston. So, when we look at the proposed design changes on Westmount Road from Glasgow up to William, there's a context that I think we need to view these proposals in. First and foremost is the climate emergency that has been declared by Regional Council. I believe this should require Council to look at every project in the region through the lens of climate change, and does this project do the best it can to reduce greenhouse gases and to adapt to climate change. Secondly, Vision Zero principles, which put human safety above all else, and set out that we should not accept that deaths and serious injuries are inevitable on our roads, and place the onus primarily on engineering design and systemic change of our road systems to reduce the deaths and injuries that we see. Also, of course, Regional Council has made the commitment to reduce greenhouse gases by 80% by the year 2050. Now, I think most of you know that the job is actually much more urgent than the date 2050 implies. We need to make differences within the next 10 years. And, at the speed that we move with infrastructure in our municipalities, that means we have to make a lot of changes in a short period of time. And that means rebooting how we think about the projects and the designs and the plans, the budgets in all the projects that the region is doing. And of course, 49%, it heard the word reboot and it came up suggesting that I might want to reboot now. 49% of the emissions in this region are from the transportation sector. So that means the bulk of our job in reducing greenhouse gases falls to the transportation sector. And when you look at how can we actually achieve an 80% reduction or greater, not by 2050, but really, we should be aiming for 2030. We have to do some things drastically differently. Now, the City of London, the Active Transportation Advisory Committee modeled what their city needs to do to meet their targets, and their numbers are very similar to ours. And they determined that the only way they could meet their greenhouse gas reduction targets would be a 25% modal share on cycling. Now, that's very ambitious, but it is not impossible. Montreal has hit an 18% modal share, and they're still climbing. Cities in Europe, such as Utrecht, have reached a 51% modal share, and Copenhagen is over 60%. So it can be done. Obviously, I'm heartened to see the prominence of active transportation and climate action in the strategic plan, and that is part of the context for looking at this particular project of Westmount. And of course, the Region of Waterloo Transportation Master Plan is another part of the context, and the TMP actually calls for this section of Westmount to have cycling facilities, and yet the design does not. So here is the Transportation Master Plan, just a small screenshot of it, and you can see the section of Westmount Road running from the green section up to Erb, and should have cycling infrastructure. So the plan, the design justifies not putting cycling facilities on this part of Westmount because it says that cyclists can simply take Glasgow across to the Iron Horse Trail. Well, first of all, the cycling facilities on Glasgow are not suitable. They are not protected. And remember, we have to get the 60% of citizens who say they would like to cycle more, but they have concerns about their safety. Well, that 60% will not cycle on these substandard width bicycle lanes. That measurement is 1.4 meters. The Ontario Traffic Manual, Book 618, says they should be an absolute minimum of 1.5 meters and recommends 1.8 meters. Furthermore, the second photo here shows the cycle lanes on Westmount ending before the intersection, as is so often the case in our region. And here is the other end of Glasgow approaching the Iron Horse Trail. You can see this big transport truck turning from Belmont onto Glasgow, and the curbs side where cyclists would be using is completely occupied by that transport truck. Pretty scary prospect. Can you imagine having your kids behind in a bicycle trailer and facing that? The second photo just shows the chaos of the traffic coming into and out of Tim Hortons, the drive-through, right near the intersection. And this is looking toward the Iron Horse Trail crossing. It's a nightmare. Various international manuals on design for cycling say that one of the fundamental principles is direct routes to get to where you're going. This is a self-propelled vehicle, and we're asking people who aren't doing a lot of cycling to do more. We can't put them 1.3 kilometers or 50% greater distance out of their way and expect them to adopt cycling when they haven't already. And by the way, that was just from Westmount and Glasgow through to the university main entrance, which would be obviously a heavily traveled section from Glasgow and Westmount. So when we look at what kind of cycling facilities should we have on Westmount, this is a very relevant graph. This is from a study done in Toronto and Vancouver of actual injuries hitting the hospital ERs in these cities of cyclists. And so in terms of safety based on injury rates, the safest cycling facility is a protected cycling track on the roadway. Multi-use paths, which have a perceived safety, unfortunately are not that safe, as this data shows. They're right down at the low end of the safety spectrum. And the reason for this is because in a dedicated cycleway that's on the road, cars are right near the cyclists and they see them, and also people coming out of driveways expect things coming on the road from either direction. And so drivers are careful around cycleways. Unfortunately, multi-use paths set back from the road, the drivers in driveways don't anticipate the cyclists coming by. This section of Westmount is a community safety zone. And yet, I just selected this one tweet from Twitter, obviously from a prominent person, but everyone is saying, this section of road is a nightmare. It's not only that I don't want to cycle on it, obviously, but I don't even want to walk on the sidewalk with my kids. It's too scary. And that is because the traffic speeds are so high. The design said that the posted speed limit was 50 kilometers per hour, but they said nothing about the actual speeds of cars. Well, you only have to stand on Westmount for a little while to realize those cars are going by at 60, 70, even 80 kilometers per hour. It's crazy. And we know that to control traffic speeds, you have to change designs. This chart shows the risk to a pedestrian or a cyclist when they're hit by a car at different speeds. And you can see that the risk drops off dramatically between 50 kilometers per hour and 40 kilometers per hour. So I would urge council to, not only for Westmount, but think very seriously about reducing the speed limit on regional roads that go through residential neighborhoods to 40 kilometers per hour. And of course, reducing the speed limit is only the first step. Then you have to change the design too.
David, you've used up your 10 minutes, but I'll give you a couple more if you could.
Okay, I think I'm on the second last slide, so I'll go quickly. This design does not adhere to best practices for intersection safety, where most collisions occur. The turning radii, sort of the size of the arc of the intersection, is 10 to 13 meters in these designs, whereas the recommendation from bodies like NACTO is no more than 4.5 meters. So these are huge turning radii. The accepting lane on Union is 6 meters wide. It should be more like 3 or 3.5 meters or 4 at the most. So the design should employ things like curb bump outs to narrow the turning radius and narrow the lane accepting the turners. So I say back to the drawing board, Safety and active transportation should be our top priorities, not only to save lives, but to convince people to shift to active transportation to save us from greenhouse gases. And I would suggest, I'm an amateur in terms of road design, but consider the 3-lane design with cycleways on either side and a turn lane in the center. Studies have shown that 3 lanes often provide the same throughput of vehicles as 4 lanes. But that would narrow it and reduce the speeds, improving the safety further. I think I can stop there. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, David. Any questions of Mr. Trueman? Okay, seeing none, thanks, David. The next delegation is Emily Slofstra. Welcome, Emily.
Thanks. It's moving for me, so that's great. So for those of you who may not know me, my name is Emily Slofstra. I'm the chair of CycleWR. It's an organization that advocates for better cycling infrastructure throughout the region. So thank you to my colleague David, who just spoke about the specifics of this reconstruction, and then I'm going to speak sort of the bigger picture of this project. So we know that this project of Westmount is currently just going to PIC. There's still a lot of work to be done. There needs to be EAs, all that kind of thing. But we're already seeing a big uproar on Twitter. And we hear from a lot of councillors that cyclists can be pretty intense sometimes. We get a little carried away because often our lives are at stake. So it's really hard if you're cycling home from work or from school, or you've got your kids and you're almost hit by a car and you come home and you see that there's a new road being reconstructed in the region and it's not going to have bike lanes on it. Even though we've just seen that sustainable transportation is supposed to be one of your top priorities. So you can see why cyclists can get a little bit frustrated at times. So even though this is just going to PIC, we wanted to make comments now just so that kind of look at the big picture and then some of the smaller picture stuff that David just talked about as well. So for the Westmount reconstruction here, just a little background on CycleWR again. Just a reminder that last year we had a pledge that 5 of you signed on to. Several of those who signed on are not here right now, but just to build a minimum grid of cycling infrastructure throughout the region within 4 years and to fund that. So we're seeing lots of great projects being done right now at the region. We just want to make sure that that momentum is continued and carried on and that we can see this grid, because it's not really helpful if you have a really great cycling infrastructure in one section and then a big gap and then more cycling infrastructure. We're never going to see that increase in mode share. We're never going to see more people bike. We're not going to see that 60% of people who say that they're really interested. We're not going to see that shift. So many of you have signed on or you've expressed interest and said that you are really interested in this. So we'd love to kind of continue that momentum. So this project on Westmount, if you haven't looked at it in detail, you can see here there's the orange line there on Westmount that shows where cycling infrastructure is planned and then a big gap where there's nothing planned. And David just already talked about how the suggestion is, instead of going and continuing on Westmount, which would take you from the south up to the park or the university, that you should go to the east and then take Glasgow and take the Iron Horse or take some other directions. And it can be a really long detour, which isn't really feasible if you have children or you're walking instead. So the suggestions as alternatives weren't really feasible in terms of what was proposed. However, if you look at the active transportation network strategy within the RTMP, it is planned to have infrastructure along this route, which is one reason why many advocates were really frustrated when they saw these plans come forward. Because I circled the section there of Westmount where you can see that there's green. Green shows that there are already proposed sites of cycling infrastructure. So for the region to say that there's going to be infrastructure here and then to make plans that say there is no infrastructure, it's really frustrating. It means we have to keep coming back to council instead of trusting that staff and council are following their own recommendations. There's other sections along there. The blue shows where there would be a really high need and where a gap would be really useful to cyclists, and the reddish color there is a medium to high need. So again, these are in the RTMP and they show that there really is a need for infrastructure along this route. So if there's not going to be infrastructure, I think there's a need to show, to have a really good alternative. Instead of saying you need to go double the distance out of your way, here's where you can go through neighborhood routes and try a different route, but really add something to that, make it a little bit more friendly. So just a reminder again of the RTMP, the first goal is to promote travel choice. You can see somebody thinking there, am I gonna drive or am I gonna take transit or am I gonna bike? We're not really making it easy for people to make these choices. For somebody who lives on Dunbar and takes their kids to Empire School, we're hearing a lot of people who say that they would just drive, even though it's not very far, because it's not very friendly to walk or to bike in that neighborhood. And then we have the strategies and the goals, so building a transportation network that supports all modes of travel, promoting a healthy community. So within those, we have these strategies already that are slowing implementation of road widenings. Reviewing corridor design guidelines. So Kitchener just did their complete streets guidelines. I know it's a little different at the region because we have these arterial roads with so much traffic on them that it can be really hard when you have a constrained corridor to try to fit infrastructure on it for cyclists and pedestrians. But I think it's something we really need to strive for. Managing transportation demand by encouraging change. We're never going to get that mode shift at all. And I think we would really, if we can even get like, doubling our cycling mode shift, I think we'd really see a reduction in the congestion that we have on our roads. Also promoting a healthy community, updating and incorporating the Active Transportation Master Plan. Again, we have these plans. They show where the infrastructure should be. We should be following them. Emphasizing safe and active travel for children. That's really important in this neighborhood as well. So I think we're going to see that in the PIC and in the plans going forward, that a lot of people are going to come forward and say they want to be able to walk and bike in this neighborhood. We did a little survey this fall. It was 4 regional staff actually who are working on building out this grid and kind of completing this network. And so we asked people who bike and walk in the region, what are some of the destinations and routes that are challenging for you? What are the gaps that mean that you maybe choose to drive instead of bike? And so Westmount actually came up quite a lot. So somebody said it's treacherous. My kids want to bike to school, but they're forced to use the sidewalks. They walk their bikes frequently because we have to cross dangerous roads like urban Westmount. So we're seeing this road come up a lot, and I think there's a lot of other regional roads that come up as well. But just something to note that people are already really frustrated about this area, and we're going to see a lot more comments like this. And David already mentioned this as well, but the traffic speeds and fatalities issue where people are going so fast on a road like Westmount because it can be overbuilt. So even having something like infill sidewalks or on-road bike lanes, they're still not safe and they're not comfortable. So even if you have a sidewalk, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to walk your kids to school. I know that we change our routes based on where we're going in our neighborhood. Because it's just not comfortable to walk on regional roads. I know if I'm walking and I have headphones in, I have to turn my volume way up because I can't hear over the roar of the cars. So there's lots of little things to be factored in about what makes a road actually comfortable to walk and bike on, besides just if there's a sidewalk or if there's a bike lane. Other things like trees and traffic speeds can really make a big difference as well. So just some final takeaways. I know this wasn't in the updated Regional Transportation Master Plan, but in terms of planning, looking at a road like Westmount and saying, what would this look like if we built this for pedestrians first? If we thought about what would it look like for parents to be able to walk their kids to school, and that was the priority, what would this road look like? And then adding in, what would it look like if people were to bike on this road first? Instead of just prioritizing somebody who's, say, driving from the south to the north to get to work, what are the economic benefits and the social benefits of somebody just being able to walk and bike in this neighborhood? And then the second point is, earlier this year, there was a budgeted item of having an active transportation engineer, and that's been pushed back several times. And I think that that's something that's really missing at the regional level. I'm not sure where that's at now, if it's been posted internally. I've been told that it was supposed to be. But I think having a point person for projects like this would be really beneficial to be able to align it. So this project crosses both Kitchener and Waterloo. So for somebody to be able to go, the project manager to easily have a point person who can touch base with Kitchener and with Waterloo, see where their plans are at. Sorry, I just heard something. Okay. So to have a point person who's responsible for making sure all these plans align, so that if there is a plan already in these neighborhoods to have transportation infrastructure, active transportation infrastructure, that there would be sort of more meshing of these plans. So I think that having that person would be really beneficial. It would be beneficial for advocates to have a point person, but also just for all of these plans to work together. Because Kitchener is working on their cycling master plan. Waterloo is updating their transportation master plan as well. So it's really hard to see how these plans might align at this point. So that's all from me.
Okay, thanks, Emily. Any questions for Emily? I would only comment, Emily, is just to thank you and CycleWR for all the positive input. I know you have members who are less patient, but we appreciate what CycleWR is doing for us.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. I don't believe there's any other delegations on this issue. If there is, raise your hand. We're not here for any decision today, but Mr. Schmidt will provide some additional context to what's happening, the genesis of the project. Maybe he can also address the active transportation engineer staff position in his comments. Mr. Schmidt.
I think with this project, one of the big misunderstandings is the word reconstruction. And this project is not a reconstruction. This project was a repaving project. So when this was started, it was looked at as simply a repaving of the existing infrastructure. We have looked at each of the intersections to see if there are improvements that we can make for both pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles at those intersections. Having said that, this section of road is within our master plan as an area that's designated for cycling facilities. In the master plan, it says those would be multi-use trails. I think that would be something that needs to be looked at, whether those multi-use trails are the best or whatever, or if there's another alternative. Our goal with this was we're actually largely getting the feedback today that we were anticipating getting on November 6th when we went out to the public with this report, because I think we would fully anticipate getting these types of comments. I think we also anticipate, given our experience putting even a sidewalk on this section of road, that we will get equal number of comments from the residents along this corridor as to what the impact of a multi-use trail or other facilities would be on them. And we want to have both of those points of view available for council. From a process perspective, we plan on taking the information we receive today, any of the information that we receive at the Public Information Center. We fully anticipate that we will get a lot of feedback on implementing cycling facilities on here. Staff will take a look at that. We will either report, or we will report back to council on that, either with recommendations on how we move forward, or with a subsequent Public Information Center that will show any changes that we have made to this, including any changes to cycling infrastructure, pedestrian infrastructure along this street. And we'll, at some point, come back to council with clear recommendations on both aspects of this. This street largely is in requirement of repaving. That's probably our most important part of this from asset management perspective. The cycling infrastructure and those other changes are ones that we can make, but there may be additional impacts of making those, and council should be aware of what those are. We are also have been coordinating with the City of Kitchener and their cycling master plan, and we are aware there are connections along here that will actually help that are being planned. Unfortunately, I can't discuss any of those because the City of Kitchener is in the process of their getting comments, getting that out to the public. So they've asked that we not discuss those. But we have been meeting with the city and looking at what the full infrastructure will look like when eventually it is completed in this area. As far as the active transportation engineer goes, we have been going through an internal process of making some changes to our engineering job descriptions and engineering progression. That has delayed us, but we are at the point of advertising that position. We are actually looking for a senior position. Our normal process from here on in would be for us to actually hire a junior position, but we feel that this job is important enough. We want someone with a lot of active transportation background, and I would guess, given our normal process, we're really looking at late December, early January to have someone in place.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Councillor Rentz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Schmidt, for your brief description. Back in the 90s, I believe, the region had looked at widening that road. And I think one of the issues was boulevard trees. None of the residents wanted to lose any of the mature trees there. How would you suspect we're going to put multi-use trails along there without having to cut down all of the trees along that section of Westmount Road?
I think that's one of the concerns. I'm actually looking at the engineer who worked on a lot of that, Mr. Vandekeer, so he has the full background, and I think
I
the
was around then too.
and the scars from that project. But that is one of the things we would have to look at. Are there impacts on trees? In doing a repaving, we did not anticipate that we would be impacting trees. We would not be doing all of that. But if we are looking at multi-use trails or other cycling facilities, we do have to then look at the impacts on trees, impacts on driveways of putting those in place. And we're quite prepared, and we'll be doing that and bring that back to council.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have no further questions. I did want to comment on it. I think we've just approved our new strategic plan. Our new strategic plan talks very fully about climate action and active transportation. So this is certainly an opportunity on this particular project that we have to have the rubber hit the road. And I appreciate that this particular project is conceived originally and budgeted originally as a repaving mostly, although there are some active transportation facilities being installed as part of this project in the more southerly segment. We may or may not be able to include new facilities in the northern segment, but I think we have to have a plan for it at an absolute minimum. The repaving, of course, is something we need to do from time to time for asset renewal and protection, of course. We know that if we don't do that, then our asset can further deteriorate and cost a lot more money to rehabilitate at a future point in time. So I'm not opposed to that, but I think that we really need to look at the opportunity that may present itself in terms of the repaving project for the more northerly segment and what the final or the optimum cross-section would be, and to use this particular process to establish that. And then determine whether or not it can be constructed as part of this project or at some future point in time. But we really do need to be serious about the requirement for a facility here. Our TMP calls for it. Our strategic plan is certainly telling us to do more of this. It's clear that people need a system, a safe system, in order to convert to a new mode of transportation. That piecemeal infrastructure is problematic to that. Costs money, it has its problems, neighboring property owners, et cetera, but at some point in time, we've declared a climate emergency. These are the kinds of projects that will help us deal with that, and I think we use this particular process with the Public Information Centre and coming back to council to have a really good look at how the infrastructure could be put into the more northerly segment of the project area. And then we can make a decision whether or not we can proceed as part of this project or not. I'd also, I'm anxious to see the active transportation engineer on staff. It's not that other staff aren't conscious of active transportation. I know it's been drilled into them and it's becoming part of the everyday process, but you really need that point person to really drive the program forward. So I look forward to the day that we have that person on board, and I appreciate, and it is significant, I think people should appreciate the significance that it has now evolved into a senior position as opposed to a more junior position. I think that is clearly indicative of the importance that staff are giving this particular file as it comes out of the strategic plan, and appreciate that staff have found room to create that new position. Nonetheless has created a bit of a delay in the hiring process, but I look forward to that person coming on board. Okay, this is here for information, no recommendation, and so I thank the delegations for coming forward today. I'm sure they and many others will participate in the PIC. I believe there's online, correct me if I'm wrong, there's online participation also encouraged through Engage WR, and I suspect we're already hearing from people in that regard. So once again, thanks everybody for that. The next item we have a delegation on is the aggregate matter, which anyways, I'll find it on the agenda somewhere. But Sam Nabi, Mr. Nabi, would you come forward, and then we'll have Mr. Regier and other staff will deal with this particular matter now.
Great.
Good afternoon, Sam.
Thank you. My name is Sam Nabi. I'm here on behalf of Hold the Line Waterloo Region. For those who don't know, we are an advocacy and education nonprofit supporting the region's countryside line. So we do a festival, we do advocacy around certain issues at the provincial and regional level, and education about protecting our countryside, protecting agriculture, protecting clean water resources, smart growth within our cities, and how those are really two sides of the same coin. The push for intensification and growth along our central transit corridor, as well as preserving the natural resources and agricultural resources of our countryside. So thank you for having me here. I'm here to speak to the staff report responding to the province's proposed changes to the Aggregate Resources Act. I want to thank John and the rest of the planning staff that have been working on this, and thanks for your detailed analysis of the changes that may be coming down the line. The report mentions that aggregate extraction is an important part of our economy here in Waterloo Region. I would also like to point out that agriculture is a very important part of our economy in the region as well. Agriculture contributed $500 million annually to our economy. And so when we're talking about opening new areas up to aggregate extraction, we do need to recognize that what was there before and what are we losing if we allow more lax rules around digging up sand and gravel and such. We all recognize groundwater is our drinking water here in the region of Waterloo. Not sure how strongly the province understands that when they're proposing some of these new rules, but we're here to make sure that groundwater is protected, agriculture is protected, and those are two extremely valuable parts of the countryside. It's not just aggregate waiting to be dug up. I want to speak quickly to a few points that were in the staff report. It was mentioned that currently, under the system that exists today, a aggregate operation can extend their permit without municipal oversight, and so to capture that, we have a zoning process. That zoning process is our only line of defense against a potential extension of an aggregate operation that is above the water table to one that then becomes below the water table and threatening our drinking water. It's great that we have that system in place today, that we have these zoning provisions that can catch that. Proposed changes to the Provincial Aggregate Resources Act mean that we may be cut out from that process. We may no longer be able to use zoning to regulate these kinds of things, which is extremely concerning. I'm very happy that the staff report highlights that in multiple instances to the province to show that why we need control over horizontal and vertical use of the properties that we are regulating here in the region. The other thing that kept popping out to me was having a right of appeal. If we lose zoning and everything is being done through an extraction permit, there's much less recourse in the current scheme of things for citizens, residents, municipalities to be involved in any kind of appeal process against inappropriate extraction. One thing that came to mind that I did not see addressed in the report is about other creative tools that we as a region may be able to use to assert some more control. If the worst case scenario happens, we lose our zoning controls and property owners can go directly to the province to drill down further and dig down further into our water table. What other tools do we have at our disposal? One of those that comes to my mind is regional road access permits. I know that there's potential stripping away of our ability to require that aggregate operations contribute back to the roads, that they help maintain the roads, that they pay into over and above the provincial requirements, and that we can secure some site-specific agreements with them, whether that's looking at well water on neighboring sites, whether that's looking at the hauling routes that these trucks will be going down every day with very heavy loads, deteriorating our infrastructure. We do still have the ability to do road access permits, and so I wonder if there's anything during that process that staff can take a look at if we need to get creative. There's another provision being proposed at the provincial level for better reporting on rehabilitation. Reporting on rehabilitation work sounds wonderful. I'm not sure whether the regulations that actually come out of this will mean a better or worse scenario for how land gets reverted back to a natural state or an agricultural state. One thing that I would really love to see, and as Hold the Line, we're always concerned about agriculture and the productive use of our countryside. If there's anything related to soil quality that we can add in that process when things are being rehabilitated, not just that it looks green and pretty like it did before, but that it can actually be a productive piece of land again. So in conclusion, I just want to say that as a representative of Hold the Line Waterloo Region, we're really happy that this staff report has come forward and that you're forwarding the concerns to the province. We don't know exactly how the final version of this provincial act will shape out, but we support the staff report and we share those concerns. We'd love to see more transparency and resources for community members for rights of appeal, and making sure that anything that we lose in the potential removal of our zoning powers can be gained in other processes, whether that's a new consultation process drawn up by the region, or we get creative with some of our own processes that we have here, such as road access permits. So a few thoughts from me, and largely just wanted to say thank you for passing on those concerns to the province.
Okay, thanks, Sam. I've got one question for you here, Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. I don't really have a question. I just want to make a couple of comments, and thank you for coming today and connecting the dots, because I had some notes to say about the sustainability of water supply sources. So thank you for bringing those two pieces together with the aggregate. You know, a couple of things with below water table applications, I suppose. The rehab is one, but the water recharge is another one. And you know, working in and being part of Elmira and that community for quite some time, I realize how long it takes to rehabilitate water once it's gone bad. So we talk about active transportation and taking care of our air and that part of it, but water is also a very important piece. So I guess I just wanted to highlight that and to really emphasize the importance of paying attention to our water and being proactive in that regard. And also to thank Eric Hodgins for his support and help with our work in Elmira. So thank you.
Okay, Sam, I have no other questions for you. We're going to have some discussion on this, I know. But I just also wanted to thank you for coming today, and particularly for the work that Hold the Line has done for us. As you well know, our growth management strategy has two primary tenets. The countryside line, which your organization is helping us communicate and educate people about and protect, and rapid transit. And of course, we have another organization, a community-based organization, that helps us in that regard. So I want to take the opportunity to thank you and Hold the Line for the work you do to support the regional growth management strategy. Hopefully the festival gets going in 2020.
Thank you.
I enjoyed going to the 2018 version. And also thank you for the Gawkel Street pop-up that you personally organized. I think that was a tremendous project. I visited each day. This is where Sam pedestrianized Gawkel Street from King through to Church Street for a period of time. And I think there's an excellent opportunity for that to be permanently pedestrianized, although that's a City of Kitchener purview. And our adjacent property, the transit terminal, which we're going to talk about shortly, I think could well play into that particular effort as well. So thanks for your efforts.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Okay. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Rogier. There is some, Michelle's going to give us some news. It's not particularly good news, as I understand. Michelle called me yesterday to inform me of some recent things going on in Toronto, which changes the landscape a little bit. I'll ask Mr. Rogier to introduce that.
Well, thank you, Chair Galloway. So this report dovetails with the report from the last cycle regarding the provincial policy statement and our concerns about some of the amendments to language there in relation to aggregate regulation. It does appear that the province is determined to reduce our input into the control of aggregate extraction, particularly in relation to the water table. Michelle Sergi has some additional comments on this report.
Thank you, Rod, through the chair. So back at the end of September, the province put proposed amendments to the Aggregate Resources Act on the Environmental Registry for comment. This report was prepared in response to that. So some of the key issues we've already heard about today, there's the depth of extraction and our ability to use, or area municipal abilities to use zoning bylaw to restrict extraction below the water table, concerns about aggregate haul routes and our ability to enter into an agreement with the proponent in order to have improvements to roads, streamlining of compliance reports, and changes to the license or site plan amendment process in order to go below the water table. So this was sort of done hand in hand with their proposed changes to the zoning bylaw. So if they took away one tool, they were saying through the Aggregate Resources Act, we're going to amend that process to allow municipalities into that process, because currently we don't really have an ability. They can or cannot circulate us when someone applies to amend a license to go below the water table. And so last week, the province amended or updated the posting on the EBR and actually put the proposed changes to the Aggregate Resources Act specific to this change. The challenge is that they've basically said that they'll circulate the applications to municipalities, but that we don't have any rights to appeal. So we don't really have a way into that process fully. And so our original comments in this report stand from that perspective, in that we're still saying we need to be allowed to fully participate in that process. So as a result of this report being submitted prior to that amendment to the environmental registry posting, and there was no extension of the date in which we were allowed to comment. We are working with clerks currently to prepare some kind of addendum or updated report to reflect that that posting was updated, but that our current comments stand in terms of our recommendation. So hoping that provides some clarification.
Councillor Foxton, the floor is yours.
Thank you, through the chair. And to Michelle, thank you very much for working with me on this. For those who don't know, I'm the chair of TAPMO, which is the top aggregate producing municipalities of Ontario. We have great concerns not only about what has gone on, but the process. Now, that first, and I'm going to go back to March 29th, when the ministry called all the aggregate industry in and said, let's have a forum. But no politicians or municipality was invited. They did amend that and allowed me, as the only politician, to attend the forum. And it wasn't bad, but the push open for business was very loudly stated. You can be open for business, but you have to bear the responsibility of what happens to our countryside when you open everything up for business. And we're all pushing for climate change, and Councillor Galloway, your comments constantly on we have to go green and take care, and sometimes I fear they fall on deaf ears. So in our sequence of events, there was the March Forum, and I tried to meet with the ministry several times throughout the summer, and they couldn't find a date. I did not know they were meeting with the aggregate industry regularly. And then the letter came on a Friday afternoon, like they usually do, stating that these reforms were going into play. And it was right after the October 21st election, because we knew nothing was coming down before the election, because they didn't want to mess up the federal election. So it came down the Friday after the election, and we had till November 4th to respond. So I had an emergency meeting with the executive of TAPMO. I worked with the AMO task force on this, and we created our brief and sent it out on the Wednesday, which gave us ample time to get it in. Finding out on the Friday, they read the bill the first time and did the first passing of the bill. So it frightens us that we really may not have a voice. I will be going down to Queen's Park, and I will be meeting with the minister to discuss these things. I don't think they're aware at all of the damage they're doing. And as I distributed that photo of the 10 aggregate pits where the water went below the water table, you have to understand you're not allowed to do a cumulative effect of a pit. So I can build a pit here, and I can build a pit here. They both can have effects, but they don't get to, you can't say, oh, the two pits side by side have this effect, the accumulative effect. So in Pushlands, they built 10 below the water table quarries side by side. I had to go to a meeting in Pushlands with the Ontario Stone, Sand and Gravel. The road was a dirt road. It was raining. And I drove down 10 kilometers with a quarry on either side of me. If I had slid it all, I would have been gone. But not just that. They tell you when they go below the water table that we're going below and it'll be fine because the land to the right and the left will filter the water. The water will run through and get the aggregate from the next one. But not if you keep taking aggregate out. It never gets to filter. And that's what gives us our clean water. So I need to find a formula to say to the province, if you go below the water table in a pit, you have to be 10 kilometers from the next pit so that there is a chance for water to filter and clean. And we have to keep pushing. And we have to hope that they'll listen. But thank you so much for working with me, Michelle, on getting this done.
Okay, there's a recommendation there. I would just add that there's reason to be concerned about this. This change over the last couple of weeks certainly appears to be the dog wagging the tail, and we should have grave concern about this. That they've introduced these regulations into legislation already, and really cut back on the amount of time for consultation et cetera. So we need to comment. This is a great document that staff have put together. But since it was put together, the landscape has changed somewhat from a regulation point of view. So, Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, just to comment and follow up on Councillor Foxton's comment that they don't seem to be listening. They've had lots of opportunity to listen. I think my observation is they just don't care. That's the biggest problem. They don't care about the well-being of the people in the countryside and where all the extraction takes place. And unfortunately, that's my opinion, and I know it doesn't matter to a lot of people, but that's the way I feel. They just don't care.
Your opinion matters to me less. Chair Redmond?
Thank you, Chair Galloway. I think I'm repeating myself from a previous committee meeting, but I would just like to point out that post-Walkerton, we are all legally responsible to show that we've done everything we can to protect our groundwater. And Walkerton was a tragedy, but there were lessons learned going forward. So it's been made very clear to the minister that should an application be put forward to change the nature of an extraction where they were not going to go below the water table, and they are, that every regional and municipal council will take them to LPAT, because we can't afford not to. We have to show that we've done the due diligence. It will be the right thing to do, but it'll also be the necessary thing to do. And they're all already dealing with old OMB hearings, LPAT 1 and LPAT 2.0. So I can't imagine that this is going to do anything to speed up that process.
Okay, and I just realized I got my analogy wrong. This is the tail wagging the dog, not the dog wagging the tail. Just want to make sure that people understand. And your opinion counts, Councillor Armstrong, so don't you diminish your opinion. Okay, there's a recommendation here to accept the staff's report. Moved by Councillor Foxton, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. All in favor? That's carried. The consent agenda, there are a few more items on the consent agenda. We're going through. Well, we're only going to be, we're here for a short while. Not a long time, just a good time. Bio break, what's that? I just want to do consent agenda and one other item, then we can have a break, okay? So the consent agenda, there are some additional items on the consent agenda. We've dealt with the first one. Anything that people want to discuss? Motion to accept the consent agenda. Councillor Foxton, Councillor Shantz, all in favor. What I do want to do here, because there's a couple of gentlemen that have been here for a couple of hours, they are here for one item only, and I want to move that up so they can go back to their regular jobs. So that is item 7.3. So whoever needs to be on 7.3, that's the procurement strategy for an advanced traffic management system. We have the principals of MyoVision here to hear the discussion. Chair Redmond. Seconded by Councillor Grants. Is there anything that staff wanted to say to this report, Mr. Schmidt? There's no presentation, I realize, but was there any?
No, there's no presentation, but we feel that the MyoVision technology, we've already been using it along the ION corridor on some of our intersections, and we think having it at all of our intersections will provide us with good information that we can use to help improve how they function, improve safety at those intersections. So we think it'll help us a lot.
Okay, Chair Redmond?
Thank you, Chair Galloway. I just wanted to underscore, I'm sure we all recall that we made an investment at least one budget or two budgets ago to buy this technology. It's homegrown, it's wonderful, and I think that it shows that the region continues to find ways to improve, to work smarter, not harder.
Okay, motion, all in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Not anticipating the rest of the agenda taking too terribly long, and we do have a couple of closed items that we need to deal with as well. Are people okay just to carry on if you need to take a break? Some have already done that. Okay, so the first item under the regular agenda is the Provincial Gas Tax Funding Survey response. Any questions? It's a motion. Councillor Fox and Councillor Shantz. All in favor? It's carried. The Brownfield Financial Incentive Program for the Roger Street property, significant amount of money, but that's what the fund is intended for. Recommendation there. Councillor Erb, Councillor Nowak, all in favor? It's carried. The change in the Central Transit Corridor, there is a presentation on on this particular matter.
Thank you, Chair Galloway and members of Council. The ION Rapid Transit System was approved by the Region of Waterloo's Council in 2011 to achieve two goals: to move people and to build community. The monitoring change in the Central Transit Corridor project was then created to understand how the social, environmental, and economic aspects of the corridor have been changing since the announcement of ION. This map illustrates the Central Transit Corridor, or CTC, which is the area that's expected to re-urbanize with ION. It is the area within approximately 800 meters of ION rapid transit stops and the lands that connect these to form a continuous corridor. The 800-meter distance is generally accepted as a distance that people will walk to access rapid transit, roughly 10 minutes walk. The monitoring program was designed as a multi-year project, starting with a baseline report, which showed the situation before construction began, and is intended to continue until 2021, after ION is functioning in the community. Each of the annual reports measures 16 indicators, each chosen for its ability to describe key aspects of change. This report updates the indicators to year-end 2018. During that year, construction of Stage 1 ION was complete and testing of the trains was continuing. And planning for Stage 2 ION continued in Cambridge, with consultation on the route, which would lead to a preferred route being chosen in 2019. Of the 16 indicators, here are 3. Investment in the CTC was strong in 2018, and the total value of building permits since 2011 climbed to $2.5 billion. Growth was particularly strong in the residential sector that year, with almost 1,000 units of housing and building permits, valued at $115 million. Even greater increases are expected to be reported in 2019. It's anticipated that the total value of building permits since 2011 could reach $3.2 billion by the end of this year. Transit ridership in the region also rebounded, and 6 out of 10 riders were getting on or off of transit somewhere within the Central Transit Corridor. In 2018, there were over 6,000 more riders each day getting on or off a transit vehicle in the corridor compared to the previous year. And the number of people living in the CTC has increased by over 12,700 people since 2011. This is a rate of 1.8% annual growth. For context, the overall growth rate in Waterloo region was 1.2% at the same period. This brought the number of people living in the CTC to 109,000 people. In addition to updating the annual indicators, each year the CTC monitoring program digs deeper into a specific theme of interest. This year's theme was urban vibrancy. And here are the results. The first indicator was the amount of vacant land. The existence of vacant land has a negative effect on the vibrancy of an urban area and can deter people from living or visiting nearby. We found that the amount of land that was assessed as being vacant, either because it had no building on it or that building was not in use, had declined by 26 hectares, or 10%, since 2011. Similarly, parking lots have a number of negative aspects in urban environments, including contributing to a heat island effect and taking away from the attractiveness of the streetscape, especially for pedestrians and transit users. Findings were that the land area covered by surface parking lots has decreased by a net area of 10 hectares since 2012. At the same time, new parking capacity has been created in above-ground and below-ground parking structures. Events are not only a means to bring people together, but they also attract people to venues at different times of day than they are normally busy. Attendance at public events hosted by the cities has increased from over 600,000 people in 2011 to over 800,000 people, an increase of 33%. In addition, privately organized events such as the Oktoberfest parade draw crowds to the corridor. Grocery stores are also an important aspect of a livable community, and increasingly so as the downtown cores evolve from being primarily employment to more residential. We found that there were 28 grocery stores in the CTC that offered a broad range of food products. And if you added in the number of small format stores, specialty food stores and farmers market vendors, it actually increased that number to about 250. Our final indicator is the number of families with children living in the CTC. Census data shows a 2% increase in families from 2011 to 2016. Not large, but it is a trend reversal from the previous census period that had showed a small decline in the number of families with children in the corridor. As expected, the number of other households, such as 1- and 2-person households, showed even greater growth at about 12%. Families are important to urban vibrancy as they attract a diverse range of services, activities, and businesses. So with thanks to all the researchers, contributors, and reviewers, we're pleased to publish this report. The results of the work are described in detail in the Monitoring Change in the CTC report attached to your council agenda. In addition, an interactive dashboard is available on the Region of Waterloo's website, and data from this report are used in a variety of economic development, housing, and other departmental projects and publications.
Okay, thanks very much, Margaret. Are there any questions of Margaret or any comments? I have none. Margaret, I did want to thank you and staff for the report. This is an important piece to evaluate what we did for all the money that we spent and the anguish we went through. So it's great to see that almost all the indicators that you're using or we're using to indicate how ION is progressing in terms of all the various implications, not just the ridership, of course, because we know that ridership, while important, is kind of the secondary reason for the rapid transit. Land use planning is its primary purpose, and all these various indicators that you are monitoring longitudinally are showing that we are meeting those objectives. So it's important work, I think, and I'm not sure how interesting all this information is to the media and others who look on, but it's certainly of great interest to me and I believe other members of council as well. Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Galloway. Just to jump in and say, I found the report fascinating and the evidence basis for justification not only of what we did with Phase 1, but I hope it heartens everybody in Cambridge as we embark on Phase 2, that we actually, we saw the promise of the LRT fulfilled. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Margaret.
Thank you.
The one item I want to mention, and I'm at committee's discretion here, it's been a suggestion to defer the collision report to the next meeting. There is a presentation that often creates a fair bit of dialogue, and given the time, and I suggested that we could defer, or might defer that to the next committee, not to council, no, to committee. I think it's just direction. It's just direction to staff to bring that back the next cycle. The next item, so if there's anybody here that wanted to hear the collision report, it's been deferred. To what date is our next committee day? December 3rd? December 3rd, okay. December 3rd, it'll be back. Now, there's also a companion report that's going to be deferred one more cycle as well, because it is scheduled to come after the collision report. So, but there's no time sensitivity on those matters. Okay, the next item is the Charles Street Terminal update. Is that the next item? Oh, I'm sorry. The next item is the Community Climate Adaptation Plan. There's just a recommendation there. There's no staff presentation. Motion to approve that. Councillor Foxton, Councillor Nowak, all in favor? That's carried. The next item is the proposed amendments to the ROP regarding matters in Wellesley and Woolwich to schedule a public meeting. Councillor Shantz, Councillor Nowak, all in favor? It's carried. Now the Charles Street Terminal matter. Mr. Bashir.
Thank you, Chair Galloway. So this is a report just seeking direction to proceed with a planning process for the disposition of the Charles Street Terminal. We'll anticipate doing some analysis on options and process requirements and bringing those back to Council for consideration and direction early in 2020.
Any questions on that? I had a couple of questions in regards to intercity transit bus who currently still use the facility. Is the terminal building itself being used for that purpose, or are they just using platforms?
The terminal building is not being used for intercity right now. The GO is using a curbside on Ontario Street. Greyhound buses do stop on the platforms, and there's a kiosk on the curbside, but the building is not open to the public.
Okay. Any other questions in regards to this? There's a recommendation here to develop a strategy. Councillor Erb, Councillor Clark. All in favor? Delegation, that's all. The next item is a consulting services matter regarding Forwell Creek to Northfield Drive, Weber Street, that is. Amendment to their agreement, Stantec. Councillor Armstrong, Councillor Erb, all in favor? It's carried. Item 7.4, the purchase of mixed fiber plastic film and bags for the recycling center. Who's our mixed fiber specialist on council? Councillor Shantz, you're going to move it. Councillor Foxton, all in favor? We have one additional item that was on the consolidated agenda, and it's item 5.3, page 256, and that's Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program application. There's a two-part recommendation there involves our application for funding. I don't have the details here. Anybody want some, anybody have any questions in regards to that? Motion? Councillor Kiefer? Councillor Jowett? All in favor? That's carried. Any other matters that anybody wanted to bring to the Planning Works Committee? Seeing none, a motion to go into closed. Chair Redmond, Councillor Shantz, all in favor? Carried. Thank you.